have a nice lineup of speakers for you to finish our online conference this afternoon. Our first guest is Mr. Skip Steward, who currently serves as the Vice President and Chief Improvement Officer at Baptist Memorial Healthcare, which is headquartered in Memphis, Tennessee. There he develops, directs, and implements performance improvement activities identifying inefficiencies. So what he does is implement strategies to improve quality, service, and finances, and while fostering a culture of continuous improvement and excellence in healthcare. Mr. Skip Steward, welcome.
Well, thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Absolutely, yes.
All right. So thank you all so much for having me, and I look forward to sharing some information with you. And just to calibrate me, do they also ask questions?
Yes, they can submit questions through the presenter orientation page.
Okay, and you can see my slides, right, Jim?
Yes, we can see them.
All right, well, I'll go ahead and get started then. So my name is Skip Steward. As it was already said, I'm the Vice President and Chief Improvement Officer at Baptist Memorial Healthcare, headquartered in Memphis, Tennessee. And what I'd like for folks to reflect on and consider is the question that's right in front of you. How is your management system working? This also is an article that I wrote for Lean Frontiers, and you can get that from them with the exact same cover that you're looking at. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my management system, and but I want you to reflect on your management system and how is it working. You know, whether people realize it or not, you have a management system, whether it was very clearly developed or whether it was kind of put together by way of ad hoc, you have some form of a management system. And you could have a lot of good parts that are really good, but if those parts are not connected, then it's going to be somewhat of a huge challenge. So let's talk a little bit about what is or how is your management system working, and I would just invite you to reflect on that. So once again, Baptist Memorial Healthcare is headquartered in Memphis, Tennessee, and we have 22 hospitals over Tennessee, Mississippi, and Arkansas. We're a non-for-profit healthcare system. We have around 180 clinics and a College of Health Science and a lot of other joint ventures and kind of moving parts of our system. Anytime people talk about the Baptist management system, they'll see this little blue brain. It's somewhat of a branding logo for us. And at the bottom of that blue brain, it says, show me your thinking. I know some people use words like lean and Six Sigma and you know, operational excellence, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. We just like to call our management system the Baptist management system. Now, the first question that becomes obvious if you're not well aware of it is, what in the world is a system? And I know we have a lot of healthcare professionals listening, so I'm going to start off with something that you're maybe more familiar with, the human body. In its basic definition, a system is a whole that cannot be divided into independent parts. The human body is a great example of a system. You could have the circulatory system, the respiratory system, the digestive system, but any one of these parts or subsystems cannot function or survive on its own. The body only lives and thrives in the interactions of those subsystems. So that's one example of what is a system. I like to use the car example. Many people listening probably drive a car, and you drive it all the time and not even think about how it operates. But a car is a great example of a system. The purpose of a car is to get you from point A to point B, but no part of that car can get you from point A to point B by itself. It's only when the parts interact do you get the property that you're looking for. Not only is that the case, but if you cut those interactions, each part loses its individual property. So for example, the property of an engine there in the front is to create movement. But if you take the engine out and put it on the ground, it can't even move itself. So we need to make sure that we're thinking systemically and that we understand what the word system is if we're personally going to call ours the Baptist management system. The other thing that we like to do with the Baptist management system is we want to make sure that it's grounded in principles. This model happens to be from the Shingo Institute, a non-for-profit institute in Utah, and I happen to have the privilege of being a Shingo examiner. And these 10 principles are embedded in the Shingo model, and we believe that these 10 principles are really have passed the test of time. And you start at the bottom with what they call the cultural enablers. You have 2 principles there of lead with humility and respect every individual. And then upon that is built 5 principles of flow and pull value and assure quality at the source and focus on the process and embrace scientific thinking and seek perfection. And then on top of that is 2 principles of create constancy of purpose and think systemically. And we believe that when those principles are interacting, you get the ultimate of creating value for the customer. Another way to think about these principles that we want to make sure are embedded in our Baptist management system is you can simply think about them as people, process, and purpose. And then ultimately, when those are interacting, you're getting the stakeholders the value that they desire. I like to use this little model in front of you. It's called a gear train. It's only a model, as the yellow box says, and all models are wrong, but some are useful. But it's a gear train. You find it in engines and equipment. And I like to use this sometimes. Some people seem to like it because it's shaped like a hierarchical format. And I like to use it to try to explain what does the Baptist management system look like, perhaps. Now, I did put there to the right a reminder for myself, that second law of thermodynamics called entropy, which states that everything is in a constant state of deterioration and degradation. I like to put that as a reminder for me to let myself know that whatever we put together, sustainment is very difficult because entropy is constantly at work at wanting to tear it down. So I'm going to use this little model, this gear train model, to simply review some of the elements of our Baptist management system. We'd like to make sure that the scientific thinking, the iterative process of plan, do, study, adjust, is at every level within the organization. But we first started off with this picture here. This is Brad Parsons, the CEO of Northeast Arkansas Baptist System. It's an integrated system of both clinics and hospitals. And there in the background is Kyle Sanders, his Chief Financial Officer. And they get together every single month, him and his entire team. Brad Parsons, the CEO, and his entire team at that healthcare system in Arkansas. They get together every single month and they review their strategic A3s. But before I go into what that is, at the top of the cork board, you see 4 white sheets. And those are our true north or our strategic themes. And those themes is that we want to provide the right care at the right time, at the right place, and the right cost. So if you go anywhere throughout Baptist and start that sentence off, someone will finish it for you. We want to provide health care at the right care, right time, right place, and right cost. Now, under each one of those themes, you might have 1 or more pillars. And those pillars are made up of 3 pieces. The first piece is what we call a strategic A3. And that's just A3 is just the 11 by 17 sheet of paper, but it's laid out in that plan, do, study, adjust format. And what it's made up of is some significant gap that needs to be shut for that specific entity. Not what they can work on, but what they must work on. So it's some kind of a big gap that they've laid out. And they've laid out a set of hypotheses and plans connected to those hypotheses that they believe will shut that gap. The second sheet of paper is what they call a status A3, and it's just for how they're going to study and adjust throughout the year. Because like all plans, whatever you lay out, some of what you lay out will be true, and you're going to discover some of it is not true. And how do they make adjustments? And then the final sheet of paper in that column is the metrics. So every single month, Brad and his team get together, and a individual is the thought leader that owns one of those columns. So they have to get up every month and share with the other members of their team. How are they doing? What adjustments are they making? How are they doing relative to that gap that must be shut? So I think it's like the second Tuesday of every month, they get together and review their strategic A3s. So that would kind of be at the highest level of the organization. Then at the next level, we have what we call departmental reviews. And there's a better picture on the second picture. So here's a much better picture. So they have strategic A3 or tactical A3s, which are laid out just like the strategic A3. It's just at a different level. So instead of being for the entire entity, it's for a department. So at that department, they're going to get together every week versus every month. They're going to get together every week on every shift, and they're going to review their tactical A3s and how they're connected to the strategic A3s that are above them. And so they're going to figure out what gaps need to be shut and what they're doing in that department to shut those gaps. But those are getting together every week, and they're connected to the strategic A3s. Then at the next level is what's called the improvement kata and coaching kata. And these folks are getting together every single day, Monday through Friday, and they're going after a challenge. That challenge happens to be connected to the tactical A3s that are at the department level, which are connected to the strategic A3s, which are at the highest level. But these guys are getting together every single day, and they're experimenting their way towards that challenge. So there's a coach and there's a learner. You can see in that picture that when I took the picture, there were 42 weeks left until they got to that 52-week challenge. Now, many times they'll hit it early, but that's where they were at that given point. Another picture of that, another example of that would be this, where you have a learner, you have a coach, and you have a second coach. And every day they're getting together, they're experimenting their way towards that challenge, which is connected to their departmental huddle board, which they're on the right in the green. So the green board is the one where they get together once a week. But this board in front of you is they're getting together every single day, experimenting their way towards that challenge that they have up on the board. Then at the next thing that we like to look at, we do a lot of what we call TWI, training within industry. And there's 3 different elements I'll speak about in a minute, but this happens to be TWI, training within industry, job instructions. And what job instructions is, in a simple way, is you're breaking down a job, you're demystifying the job, and then you're going to layer, you want the job to be done in a very certain way. So you're going to layer that back into the learner's mind to try to create a standard behavior. Now, the reason they're doing this is because in that daily board that we call the improvement kata and coaching kata, they discovered that every Tom, Dick, and Harry happens to be doing a particular job completely different. And that variation is causing defects and errors. This particular job that you're looking at on the screen was counting in the OR. I had no idea how difficult that was until we had to work on that job. But that's a job that they wanted to make sure that everyone was doing it the same way so that they reduced the risk of anything being left inside the patient, which is a big issue throughout the United States. But specifically, they were not doing this just for the sake of doing it. They were doing it because in their improvement kata and coaching kata board that I showed you, they discovered that everyone was doing a task completely different. Just to reinforce again, within TWI, there's basically 3 legs to the stool. The blue card stands for TWI, job instructions. That's how do we create a standard behavior so that everybody does a task in a very similar way. How do we create those new neural pathways in the brain or muscle memory so that we all do it the same way? Very, very powerful. The yellow card is a tool that we use in TWI, job relations. Job relations, I always like to say it's the best way I know to operationalize respect for every individual. And it can really be used, even though it's in this bottom little gear, it's really used at every single level within the organization. How do we get people to follow our leadership? And when there is a people problem, how do we deal with it in a scientific way versus an emotional way? And then the green card stands for TWI, job methods. That's how we look at a particular part of a process and we ask questions with a purpose. I sometimes joke and say we're asking questions on steroids. But what we're trying to do is pull the ideas out of the real people on the front lines that do the real work. How do we pull ideas out of their head that could be some really big improvements? So that's TWI, job instructions, job relations, job methods. Here is another picture of the TWI job instructions. They're breaking down a blood culture using a central line. Patrick Gropp, a pretty well-known TWI master trainer, and one of our nurses, Sandy. But once again, they wouldn't be doing this work just for the sake of doing it. They're doing it because in their kata work, they discovered that everyone was doing this task completely different, and that variation was causing defects and errors and mistakes and was holding them back from moving forward. And so this last example happens to also be a blood culture. What was interesting about this one was when we were done doing this training, the nurse in the middle looked up and said, quote, "I've been a nurse for 27 years, and until today, I didn't know why you were supposed to use the blue bottle first and then the purple bottle. I just did what I was told." And see, that's problematic. When we only do what we're told, that's when problems and errors occur. So this is not meant to be holistic. It's just meant to be an example. As other things come along, and they do, we have to figure out how to connect the dots or how to connect the gears in this analogy. This is a very fragile process. This is only a model. It's not meant to be the end-all model. One hospital recently was putting in a great idea-driven organization approach. That's where every single person on every single level has the opportunity to share their ideas. And as they worked out the kinks, they eventually connected it to the rest of the management system. And so those are just some thoughts to let you know how some of this is connected. We have some other parts. You can imagine these two parts are connected in gears, even though I didn't put them in gears. The shepherding group is a group we have of both executives and non-executives at an entity that oversees the work that's being done, so that when people struggle, not if they struggle, but when they struggle, there's someone there to help them. They're also looking at the person's skill development. And Get Better Jumpstart is just our version of a Kaizen event done kata style, if you're familiar with that term, Kaizen. And so Get Better is just part of the Baptist branding. So those are some more pieces. But the big thing that we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that our management system is embedded within principles. We want to make sure that we're looking through the lenses of these guiding principles to make sure they're all throughout our management system. You heard me talk a lot about entropy. No, I don't think we talk about entropy enough, that second law of thermodynamics. But what I've started talking about lately to be able to relate to people, to use words that they could understand, is I've started calling it the melting sandcastle, which I've got from Jim Lancaster. He's the CEO at Lantac in Louisville, Kentucky, and wrote a really good book called The Work of Management, A Daily Path of Sustainable Improvement. But if you think about that sandcastle right there, there's lots of elements that want to tear it down. The wind, the water, dogs, kids. And to keep it intact, you're going to have to be very intentional. You're going to have to give it attention. You're going to have to shore it up. You're going to have to protect it. And I don't believe that's any different than the systems that we're trying to put in place too. Entropy is constantly working on them, and they're wanting to melt your sandcastle. That's why sustainment is so incredibly difficult. You heard us talk earlier about purpose, people, and process. And I like to make the argument that these three dimensions need to be part of any management system. I would even make the argument that if you're not getting the results that you want, whether those are financial results or patient satisfaction results or whatever it may be, that within those dimensions, there's probably something not being connected. Now, don't miss what I'm trying to say. There's lots of tools and techniques. Those are really large dimensions. But within those three dimensions, I believe that those three dimensions have to interact. They're not independent, they're interdependent. And when they're working together, we can get the world-class results that we want. Now, here's a much more complicated figure than that little triangle. And this geometry figure, I think, is a really good figure to show you the complexity of our systems that we live in, both in hospitals and clinics and all elements of healthcare. There on the right are the principles that make up the Baptist management system. They're a little different than the Shingo. We added the principle number 3, trust, and number 4, empathy. But what's important to remember is that these 11 principles that make up the Baptist management system are not independent. They're interdependent, just like in that picture. They're reacting off of each other. There on the left, you can see some of the elements, not all of them, but some of the elements that make up the Baptist management system. And I'm going to review those here in a second. And they also are interdependent. So let's kind of review a couple of these. So the first thing, some of you on the webinar may be asking, what in the world is kata? And that's a legitimate question. That little girl right there is practicing a kata as she's trying to practice playing the guitar. But in simple definition, a kata is a routine that you practice so that its pattern becomes an automatic habit that gives you some new skills. So every single day at Baptist Memorial Healthcare, in our hospitals and clinics and different places, we have people practicing this thing called kata. We have a learner, we have a coach, and sometimes we have a second coach. But they're experimenting towards some big challenge to improve healthcare. And we have seen a significant impact both for patient care and financial and all the right care, right time, right place, and right cost. Let me kind of go over briefly how it works. This model that you're seeing on the screen that says our mental model was taken out of the original work of Mike Rother in the Toyota Kata book. Now, the picture of the book I have on the screen is his newest book, the Toyota Kata Practice Guide. In this model, we took it and we baptized it to make it relevant to our folks. And so on the far right is our logo, actually. All I did was put the word vision inside of it. The little triangle represents the threefold ministry of Christ, preaching, teaching, and healing. And the big rectangle represents our system. But we get into the model with step 1. Step 1 is the challenge. A challenge is a strategic imperative. It's a game changer. It's not what we can work on, it's what we must work on. Something that we absolutely must work on, either for patient care or for financial reasons or whatever it may be. Then step 2 is the current condition. Now each step will frame the next step. So in the current condition, we're trying to say, where are we at now in light of that challenge? The current condition is really made up of 3 pieces. One is what I call the result metrics. For anyone listening that have ever attended a sporting event, when you look up at the scoreboard, that's a result metric. It tells you the final score. And we do that in healthcare. We have things like number of infection rates, the number of falls, the collection rates in the billing department, whatever it may be. And those are all result metrics. But then there's process metrics that contribute to those result metrics. In the sporting analogy, you might have how many yards someone ran, how many passes someone completed, how many penalties you had. And those are all process metrics that are contributing to the result metrics. But the third piece is what some people like to call the eye test, or what I like to call the pattern of work. How are we playing the game? How are we playing the game that contributes to the process metrics and result metrics? So that's a basic definition of a current condition. Then we move on to step 3. What is the next target condition? The magic word there is the word next, because it implies there will be multiple target conditions on your way to the challenge. If the challenge is around 52 weeks from now, from the time you know the current condition, number 1, the challenge is 52 weeks away, then the next target condition is going to typically be 2 to 3 weeks out. But unlike the current condition, the target condition is nothing more than a hypothesis. See, the current condition is reality. How am I really playing the game now? Not how do I want to play it, how am I playing it, and what are the process metrics and results metrics I'm getting? The next target condition says, how do I hypothesize that I want to play the game in 2 to 3 weeks, and what would be the process metrics and result metrics if I were to be able to play it like that. And then we look at the obstacles that are separating us from the target condition. And I'm sure you might ask yourself, why are the obstacles shaped like a heart? Well, that's a good question. I actually got that from a good friend of mine, Brandon Brown, because obstacles are really the heart of the matter. And so we want to define what is separating us from our current condition to the target condition. Once we have clearly defined that, then we iterate, or we PDSA, plan, do, study, adjust, through one obstacle at a time. So that's the basic model that makes up the improvement kata. It's a very iterative process, and as my friend Beth Carrington likes to say, it's a meta routine that stays the same regardless of the circumstances. It's a routine way of acting and thinking. So it's not a physical routine, but it's a meta routine. So we're trying to get people to think this way because we naturally, all of us, jump to conclusions. And we're trying to think more scientifically. So this is the model, but one question is, how do I make that model come to reality? And I'll talk about that in a second. One more thing about this model is it's content neutral, meaning I can use it in healthcare, I can use it outside of healthcare. And it's also fractal, meaning I can coach CEOs using this model, and I have, and I can coach frontline nurses, and I have, with the same model. It's very fractal. So those are the 4 steps: understand the direction of the challenge, grasp the current condition, establish the next target condition, and then iterate towards the target condition. But I told you to make that model come to reality, so it's not just theory, I have to have something else. And here's the something else. I have to have what's known as the coaching kata. And so these are just little cards to help us get started, but we have to use scientific coaching to operationalize that 4-step model that we call the improvement kata. Now, sometimes folks will ask me, why do you call it scientific coaching? And the reason I explain that is that unfortunately, we live in a society where people use the word coaching generically, kind of like they use the word friend on Facebook. But we're talking about being very intentional and very scientific on how we're doing the coaching. So this little card gets us started. And so we have a learner and we have a coach, and we'll talk more about that. So in the real world, this is what that improvement kata model looks like. It's a little messier. A couple things to recognize about it is that the first thing is you cannot reach the overall challenge right away. You're not going to go from where you're at to number 1, the challenge, just in one step, even though many of us try to do that. The path to the first target condition will not be predictable. Many times you're taking 3 steps forward and 2 steps back, and you're going to have to experiment to get there. As you move towards that target condition by experimenting against all these obstacles shaped in the heart format, you're adjusting based on what you learn. So there's an example of a storyboard where they practice kata, and there's a learner and there's a coach. There's always a learner, there's always a coach. They meet for about 20 minutes a day, every day, Monday through Friday. Now what's interesting is they're smiling, but that's not what's going on inside. What's going on inside is represented by that little cartoon figure, because they're learning a new skill. And when you're learning a new skill, it feels awkward, it feels uncomfortable, you feel forced. That's a normal feeling. So this is what we call the storyboard. We have the 52-week challenge up there. We have an area where we document our current condition, what is reality. We have an area where we document our target condition, where do we hypothesize we want to be at in 2 to 3 weeks. We have an area where we write down the obstacles that we think are separating us from the target condition. And then we have an area where we experiment through those obstacles one at a time. By the way, the coach also feels uncomfortable. They feel awkward because they're learning a new skill too. They're thinking to themselves, why can't I just tell the person what to do? But that's not really coaching. So that's what it looks like in a very easy format. So right now we have folks all throughout our system at every level. And these pictures are pictures of chief nursing officers, of CEOs, directors, trying to learn how to experiment their way forward to some kind of a big overarching challenge. Just to hit on the PDSA a little more, for those that may not be completely familiar with it, the plan, do, study, adjust. In the plan, you're making a prediction of what you are going to do and what do you expect as a result of doing that. And then you're going to do it. You're going to try it. You're going to take the step, as they would say. And then you're going to study. You're going to observe and measure what happens. And then you can compare the outcome to, and see what you learned from that. We really believe that this is probably the most effective way we have to navigate this unpredictable territory that we live in today. What's interesting is that physicians have been doing this their entire career. They obtain the patient's history, conduct diagnostic testing, they do the treatment, then they follow up to assess the patient's response. And many times they have to make adjustments to the medication and the therapy. They've been doing this their entire life. We now need to do it on the business that revolves the work. Once again, there's a learner, there's a coach, there's a second coach. The learner does have a team behind them, but only the learner and the coach show up to the board every day. The second coach probably shows up there once or twice a week. The learner and the team own the target condition and work to achieve it. Now, this next thing might hit a paradigm, but the coach is responsible for teaching the improvement kata, and the coach is responsible for the results. The second coach is responsible for assuring the development of the coach and assuring alignment to the organizational goals. Now, to make this happen in our organization, we had to take people that might be at a director level, might have 400 or 500 people reporting to them, and they had to start off as a learner. They had to humble themselves. They had to practice that principle of humility, and they started off as a learner for some period of time until we felt they were ready, and then we rotated them into a coach's role, and then they spent a good amount of time there, and then we rotated them to a second coach. By doing that, they were able to be a much better coach and second coach. It's going to be very difficult to be a coach and second coach unless you've cut your teeth on being a learner with the improvement kata and coaching kata. TWI, I always like to refer to it as another type of kata. It's been around since the 40s, but just like with kata that we're creating these new neural pathways, we're doing the exact same thing with TWI. We're creating routines and habits. It was amazing to spend some time in Japan the last 10 days where one of the historians that was there during the early days made a statement that had it not been for TWI, we would not have the Toyota production system today, which was shocking and rewarding to hear him say that. But me and two other gentlemen recently wrote a book about the management system and about some of the things that we're doing, and just trying to encourage people to reflect and think about their management system, to think about if the dots are being connected, if they're really incorporating purpose, people, and process. So that's the presentation that I had for y'all, and I would definitely welcome any comments or questions.
Yeah, thank you, Skip. That was great. I mean, we continue kind of our funnel down as we go here throughout the day, and it's kind of interesting in thinking about what you're talking about. It's kind of like earlier on, I think it was Per Byland's presentation on this and the stuff I got hearing about economics, what he talked about. Same thing here, what you're talking about. This and the things we typically learn when we learn about management systems. So you're talking about something a lot different, and also correlating to the video we had about the submarine captain, about those people, processes, and so forth, about those relationships and linking all that up. So thank you. We do have a question.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it is, somebody said, does your organization meet external management systems from third parties like ISO 9000, 2015 in this case, or Joint Council of Accreditation of Hospitals?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, we have folks like the Joint Commission and other external commissioning bodies that come in and review our systems. Absolutely.
Skip, you might comment on how some of the things you've done, and I'm going to take an opportunity here and kind of just pump Skip up a little bit. I mean, Skip, if any of these speakers have an opportunity, Skip is just an incredible mentor, willing to share a colleague of mine, Dr. Chris Bernheisel, and I were just down in Oxford, Mississippi. Skip runs a summit every year and has been incredible. Both Skip and the Baptist Memorial System has just been incredibly generous in sharing with everyone what they're doing and opening the doors. It's an amazing system down there. If you ever have the opportunity to either talk with Skip or go to one of these summits, I would highly recommend it. Skip, one thing I'd ask you along the lines of the accreditation, as you've been doing that work with getting rid of hospital-acquired infections and indwelling lines, you might comment on how using standardization, is that improving things when the accreditation committees come in? What do they see? How does it influence accreditation with the work that you're doing in the management system?
Yeah, we actually tend to get really high marks from the Joint Commission and different accreditation bodies. A lot of them have never heard of CATA, which is not unusual. And we've even had different state bodies as well as more national groups a couple of times even thought we had our data wrong because they had not seen that kind of radical improvement over a period of time. And that's always kind of fun when they think that the numbers are wrong because they're not used to seeing that big of a gap of improvement. So yeah, we've had great, but basically you just use one of those infections. Many people on the phone are probably very familiar with something like called CAUTI, central acquired urinary tract infection, pretty big one that people track across the nation. But one of the things we discovered is that good people with good intentions were all putting in a Foley catheter in the ICU different. They were putting it in how they taught, somewhere, wherever they came from in the nation. And so TWI job instructions is a methodology of demystifying the job and creating one standard way, and then feathering that into the learner's brain so that we can create a standard behavior on how we do. And we just saw pretty much in that particular hospital, we saw the CAUTIs, the central line acquired urinary tract infection, completely go away. And so it's had a huge impact. And so, but even, I know you didn't ask this question, but just to build on the systemic thinking again, and in the article that looks just like the front cover of this, I used this example. It was a real example. I was at a ER department, emergency room at a hospital, and they were telling me about this overarching big goal that they needed to work on. And I asked them, I said, well, what's the goals of the radiology department and of the admissions department and of the lab? And I remember the person with best of intentions looked back at me and said, I don't know, and why should I care? And I said, well, the reason that you should care is that you have no hope of hitting your goal if all of these goals are not aligned. See, we've kind of all been taught in school and in life that if we all do our very best, then as a whole, we will do our very best. And thinking systemically is counterintuitive because that is not true. Everybody can do their very best, and as a system, you can still fall on your face. Because if the parts are not interacting in a system properly, you will not get the results that you need. And so that's why I like to focus so much on systemic thinking.
All right, great. Thank you. Thank you, Skip. We very much appreciate it. We're kind of at our target time. So again, thank you very much for sharing. And we'll go to a break and we'll come back at 2 p.m. Eastern time.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much, Skip.